everything. Now make that small. Good. Thank you so much. So hello everyone. Really welcome you to this great lecture by Dr. Steinberg. My name is Ken. I'm the section chair for AIAA Los Angeles Las Vegas section. On behalf of the whole section, we welcome you, and we want to build a connection with as professor has been doing is, he's working in government and also academic. And we have a lot of members working actually in industries, space satellite or military or like just commercial or research. So we want to build a connection. It's good for your future and also for mutual support for each other. So I'll just move this. Okay, so first of all, thanks AIAA headquarters, of course, Dr. Steinberg. And so for folks online, if you have bandwidth issue, please, you can turn off your camera, and you can also dial in to save the bandwidth if that's a problem. Just a quick words about AIAA. AIAA is a nonprofit organization. It's American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. Our mission is to help you, to encourage people to do a good job, to learn more about what this profession is all about and what we've been doing. There are a lot of great people and excitement. For example, our executive director, Dr. Mr. Daniel Parker, he's actually the former NASA manager for the DCX-XA, the vertical landing rocket 20 years ago, ahead of SpaceX and Blue Origin for 20 years. So that's what kind of people we have. So basically, we have a very long history, more than 90 years. Wright brothers, right? Robert Goddard, one on aviation, one on rocketry. They founded their organization in the 1920s, and both organizations merged in early 1960s to become AIAA. So we are direct, descendants for Wright brothers and Robert Goddard. So it's very. We have national presence, everywhere as you see the picture, but we also have international presence. Okay, we have more than 30,000 members. It's growing. Our headquarters is in Virginia, DC. So it's good for people. If you are a student, we have a student membership. You're professional, we have free educator, free high school membership. The university student member is $28 per year. And we have a student branch actually here on Cal State Long Beach. Unfortunately, they are too busy, they cannot come here. But some of them, they are doing online. Yeah, I think the course or something like that. Different category of membership. Generally, we have professional, we're young professional. When you graduate under 35, you pay 50%. With retiree, also 50%. So you can see educator is free. We do very good jobs in STEM outreach. So this is just an example of who we are, what we're doing. So for example, this is our council, our board member for Los Angeles Las Vegas section. Well, this is kind of, you see the picture upper left, Dr. Jeff Michelle, he is with Raytheon. He's highly respected. He's a satellite remote sensing expert. He's an AIAA fellow, Raytheon fellow. So just give an example. Then we also have Sherry upper right. She's working with JPL. And then we have Kirsty, the second row, the third column that she's working with Boeing. Then we have Lee, the third person here. He is with Advanced Aircraft with Northrop Grumman. And then we have also education. This gentleman, you probably need to remember, he's our education director. He's actually worked with Lockheed Martin. So he's helping the university to gain more connection. So if you're an AIAA member, you can join the technical committee, which is the core of AIAA. And it's like a social media for AIAA engage. You can reach out to global experts in aerospace. Every day, if you like, you receive the email for daily launch. Then of course, the prestigious Aerospace America for free if you are a member of AIAA. And you can join AIAA conference for free. Not for, sorry, with great discount, not for free. And AIAA published, so it's a great resource, a lot of distinguished journal, and also AIAA Foundation for giving awards, and Career Center. And one important thing is if you are a member of AIAA, you can advance of your membership. For example, a very good example is, for example, our Dr. Jeffrey Bushell, as I just mentioned, former section chair, he's AIAA fellow. One person I want to, Mr. Steve Izakowicz, is AIAA fellow. He's the president of Aerospace Corporation. We have a educator here. She's actually working there. And we have Gwyn Shotwell. She's actually leading SpaceX here, honor fellow, and Dr. Gerstenmaier, Bill Gerstenmaier, is actually right now the VP of SpaceX. And you can get awards if you do a good job. For example, this lower left, Dr. Belalacqua, he was the inventor of F-35 VTOL engine. On the right is Mr. Fujino, is president of Honda Aircraft, and they got the Reed award last year. A student membership, you got the chance to get the scholarship, and these are the major AIAA conference, national conference. For example, the Ascent is next month. It's about space, very very exciting, and just a few words about Southern California. We are here. There are so many aerospace companies here. So really want to connect with Dr. Steinberg with this exciting field, with the industry, and of course universities and also the professionals. There's so many of them. The new company, coming here every few months. We just have a Slingshot Aerospace coming to El Segundo, and we have another company. I think it's called the Spin Launch in Long Beach, right here. At Long Beach, you have Relativity Space, Virgin Orbit, a lot of great activity. And actually here, the more 3D printing company is also in Long Beach. So we keep doing events. So I have my personal my organization AIAA business card on the back. So please pick it up and send me an email, and I can send you all the great events. This Saturday, we'll have the quantum physics event. Then next Thursday, we are going to downtown, very exciting space architecture. Then we have like a 3D printing, and Dr. Bradley is going to talk about sustainable aviation and electric hybrid aircraft, which is flying cars. It's very exciting. So we also have newsletter. So we just have a woman professional event, Making Space for Women. And actually this lady here, Diana, she graduated from Cal State Long Beach. And she's now working in Northrop Grumman. So it's a great example. And you can see actually several interesting person behind. And then we have our Monica. She's sitting right there. She's our model educator. And she's also the president of Satellite Education Conference, which is great to do. So without further ado, I think you all very familiar with Dr. Steinberg. So I'm not going to read all the details, but if you look at his amazing career, that he's very involved in the development of GIS and the remote sensing. And he's working with so many departments, and I'm so impressed that this let's say this of course 110,000 county employees, of course 40 departments, and so many organizations. And this is a emerging field, and I have been discussing with our members, including Dr. Michelle, and some of the Boeing top secret people working on spy satellite. I mean, this is really amazing field because you can use it for your daily life. For people, a lot of people that work on military things, they cannot share, they cannot really, but you might end up working with them. For example, there's a company called Maxa, actually took the remote sensing, very important part of the brain situation right now. We have to have people working there. It's good to network. So the key thing is network. So basically, Dr. Steinberg is the GIO in the LA County, but he's also a first idea, and been involved with many, as he said in the very beginning, the broadband and many things, and we really want to build a connection with AIAA because it has a lot of people working on this. Without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Steinberg.
You don't have to clap for me. Most of you see me every week, right? But welcome to our guests in the room and online. It's nice to have you. And I do think, as Ken said, a lot of the organizations your members work with, you mentioned, all the aerospace companies locally, many of them are involved in the remote sensing acquisition and the development of those technologies that we're interested in, in the geospatial realm for our own uses in analysis and mapping. So, and I will, for the students, I'll get you a copy of this set of slides Ken just showed on the class site. We jump to the slides for today.
Might want to share on that.
Oh yeah, I need to share. Is it not sharing? It's that. I always forget something. There we go. Right now. It's always the technology that's never know where to put this little zoom box. There. Oh, I think we got most of the screen visible. Okay, so what I want to talk about today, I mean, we've been talking about remote sensing in the classroom side here for the last 45 minutes. I'm going to turn my attention now to how we use geospatial imagery from various platforms in local government in LA County or more broadly local governments. And I'm going to do a little bit of stage setting, especially for those online who may not know the context that we're working in at the county, but also for the students a little bit too. Some of this may be new. Slides to advance. Okay. So I'll give you a little bit of background just on who LA County is, broadly. I know your section doesn't, you cover like a lot of, not just California, right? You cover this whole West, California and adjacent.
Yes, our region 6.
Yeah.
Cover all the West Coast.
So
we are.
So maybe some people don't know LA County who are listening in. Talk a little bit about how we use spatial information generally, which often comes from remote sensing, but not exclusively. I'll give you a few use cases and examples, and share a few other, tidbits along the way. So that's kind of my quick overview. So if you don't know LA County, we are the largest county in the country, over 10 million population. So if we were a state unto ourselves, we would be one of the top 10 states by population in the country. About the same size population as North Carolina, Michigan, sort of. States like that. Our geography is a little bit smaller than those states, obviously, but we're still fairly large, 4,000 square miles-ish. There's always debate when you're dealing with coastlines about how long the coastline is and therefore how big the area encompassed is. That's a fractal problem we won't get into. But the important thing for county government is our jurisdictional responsibility for most things is the unincorporated portions of the geography, those parts that are not within a city. So we're sitting here in this room in the city of Long Beach. The city of Long Beach has its own government. They take care of most of their own stuff. And that's not, as a county person, that's not officially my business. We have 88 cities in the county. Those are all on this map, the gray parts. The yellow stuff is everything else, the unincorporated, that's the county jurisdiction. Now, there are certain areas like public health that cross over, where the county is the public health agency for most of the cities as well. Although Long Beach is special, they have their own public health, as does Pasadena. But that said, you can see it's, probably about 60% of the land area from a government jurisdiction perspective is unincorporated county. And we do all those services. And of the 88 cities, we still provide a lot of services on contract to about 50 of the cities. Fire, sheriff, sort of emergency response we do for many of our cities and a lot of other things. And you can already sort of imagine, if we have to know about what's happening in this much geographic area, serving this many people in this many, 50 contract cities plus the unincorporated county, we have a lot of data needs. So that's where this stuff comes in. County is big, as you know, and complicated. So we have, and I never can give you a solid number, so I'll say about 37 departments. I think in the last couple of months, we created 2 or 3 new departments. So they're always reconfiguring new departments based on, what's going on in the world, where we need to focus. We have a lot of departments. We have hundreds of committees and special commissions, school districts, sanitation districts, water districts, lots of jurisdictions. It's super complicated to even get your head around. We, as Ken noted, we have over 100,000 employees in the county. For those interested in geospatial specifically, about 160 GIS classified positions across the county, but a lot of GIS and geospatial users, other types of data analysts, data scientists, decision makers that leverage all this information we're doing. From just an internal perspective, we have over 4,000 buildings that we manage or occupy. So those are office buildings, hospitals, clinics, parks, rec centers, lifeguard towers at the beaches, all kinds of stuff, structures, lots of parkland, and costs a lot of money. So, like I said, we're as big as a state in many ways. We have a big budget. I don't get enough of it, but that's a separate complaint I will leave aside. But this year, it's about a $36 billion budget, which is a lot of money, but again, serving a lot of people in a lot of areas. So that's just to sort of set the stage. A little bit about, for those who may not know what a GIO is, again, probably more of the folks listening from the outside organization. So you may have heard of a CIO, a Chief Information Officer. Those are common in many organizations, and they deal with data, information in a digital form across pretty much all domains. So that's people dealing with databases essentially and data systems. My role as a GIO is to narrowly focus on the geospatial component. Now, some of you might already know this because I've said it in a prior class. Everything's spatial. Almost everything we do in our lives in government happens somewhere. So, I always am poking and prodding my colleagues at the county saying, well, yeah, but your data is spatial too. So it really is in the geospatial realm. But what we do in collaboration, to be honest, between the geographic side and the information side is find ways to leverage data in space, in geography, to help move the county's mission forward, whatever that may be. So I work on a lot of strategy and vision around implementing geospatial. And when I get to the imagery part in particular, how can we leverage remotely sensed imagery to do the county's business more effectively and efficiently? Because there are lots of opportunities. Some we've done for a long time, some are emerging, some have yet to be explored. But that's really my role, is to work across all of our departments and organizations to help the staff, the management, the decision makers see where they can leverage geospatial information, remotely sensed information to do a better job across, and then coordinate all that stuff, because what we don't want to do is replicate the same thing in 37 departments. That would be inefficient. We want to share data, share capabilities and resources and tools and software and all that stuff. So keeps me pretty busy. The way we structured that, like any large organization, is we have what's known as an enterprise GIS structure. What that means is we have a centralized enterprise GIS team that administers the infrastructure, servers, software platforms, databases, geodatabases, scripting and maintenance of data and all that stuff for everybody. So every department doesn't stand up its own server. Every department doesn't contract its own data collections. We do that centrally at the enterprise level, and then we share that out. So the simple way I like to describe that is we're the hub of the wheel, and then the spokes go out to all the different departments and end users who have needs for geospatial information, geospatial resources, and we can support them. So our enterprise team is presently 17 staff at various levels. Once we're fully fleshed out over hopefully the next year, we'll be at 22. So for students, there will be jobs opening up in my group at the enterprise team over the next year, I would expect. So stay tuned. And one of the other things that's really interesting, and I'll come back to later in the talk, is GIS really got to, and geospatial and remote sensing got to really shine as we've gone through the COVID pandemic. Because what we realized is when everyone was stuck in work from home or work remote and not able to go out in the field, we had to find ways to do things that we may have traditionally sent people out on the ground and figure out how to do that remotely so that we could all be socially distanced and safe and still do all the things the county is expected to do for its constituents. And that's where I think remote sensing really comes into play for a government, any government agency, the county or otherwise, is that we can take what would be traditionally field-based work, sending somebody out there in a county truck to go visit some place and look at it and record data about it, and then bring it back and put it into a computer database somewhere, and then do something with it, make decisions, do analysis. A lot of government work, as you can imagine, traditionally is done by people driving around in trucks or cars, and more electric cars. We're trying to be good there. But even that, I'll just give a quick example. When I first came to the county, I went around and talked to as many of the department leads as I could to find out what do they do, what's their sort of day-to-day business, and how GIS or remote sensing could help them. And one of the things I learned very early, it's more of a geospatial than a remote sensing, was I was talking to one department who has to send out inspectors. It was the agriculture weights and measures. These are the folks who go out and check gas pumps really give you a gallon of gas, or the scale at the grocery store really gives you a pound of grapes. They put those little seals on all those things that say this was checked by the county, and it really gives you the measured amount you're paying for. Well, somebody has to drive around and do that. And they have to visit every store with a scale, every gas pump, everything on some cycle. Said, well, how do you manage the assignments? Oh, well, we have these little racks on the wall with note cards in them. They said, well, these are all the note cards that are each all the places, and we sort of shuffle the cards and we assign, here's your deck, here's your deck, here's your deck, that's your work for today. Said, so you don't do any route planning. You don't know where to go, when to go, what the optimal route is. You just give a stack of cards and go. Yeah. And I said, and how's that work for you? Well, I said, well, first of all, we don't send anyone out until after 10 in the morning, because if you go early, you get caught up in all the school traffic of parents dropping off kids at school, and they got to be back in the office by 3 because, by 2:30, all the parents are picking their kids up at school. So basically we can work between about 10 and 2 in the field, and the morning and the afternoon, we do the data entry in the office room. So, well, that seems silly. I bet you could do better with that. I later, even more recently, like a month ago, found out our mail services in the county do the same thing, except they're fancy. They print out data on a Word document and hand that out to each mail delivery person every day. If something changes in the middle of the day, it's like, what do you do? Oh, we call them on their cell phone and say, hey, Frank, can you swing by this department's office? And they have a special package they need picked up. They have no idea where Frank is. They have no idea if he's close to that place, if the traffic is bad or good. They just call somebody and say, hey, pick this up. We think you're in that area because that was on your list for today. So for those who know GIS and routing, it's like, well, duh, there's an easy thing. So that little picture up in the corner is an example that COVID actually generated. We were looking at, well, actually it was a little bit before COVID. We were looking at the idea of hoteling or working at like WeWorks types of locations, letting people work in an office other than their department office. So we did a optimization model to look at all 110,000 employees, where they live and where they could ideally work to minimize the drive time and the fuel and the carbon emissions and all that. And then we use that to pick the buildings where people could, say, okay, instead of going to my office today, I can go to this other office and get a cubicle and a plug and an internet connection and work somewhere else, today that's closer to meetings I have or other things. So we've done a lot of route optimization. COVID and fires and other things lead us to do that, to figure out who's available to get to a certain area to help at a vaccination facility or a testing facility, or where do we need more of those? When we have fires, we can look at where all of our employees are that might be affected by the fire. So we know those people maybe aren't as available to work because they're evacuating their family or something like that. Or we need to send people in for a recovery center. Who can we get there quickest and most efficiently based on it? So now everything we do for staffing related stuff, we run a weekly routing optimization against the county HR database. So we know where everyone lives and where they work and where they may be needed in a special emergency, and we can optimize that and we keep that up to date. So that's kind of a quick example of optimization from a geospatial perspective. So why do we care about maps? Why? Floating up. It should be obvious, right? Everything we do happens in space. A lot of our things are obvious geospatial things. We have facilities like parks, land areas we manage. We have facilities like buildings that people need to find and access, clinics, schools, libraries. We use it to do grant funding processes. So at the beginning of class, I was talking about the broadband stuff. We have a lot of parts of the county where there's poor broadband access. Well, how do we figure that out? And how do we figure out how to improve that? Well, that's a geospatial problem. We need to know where the low-income, underserved communities are. We need to know where the fiber lines are. We need to know where Wi-Fi signals can travel based on topography and building heights. So we can conceptually figure out like where to put an antenna if we're going to do wireless. So we've done a lot of that modeling around broadband. I don't know the dollar amount, but I just heard it this morning. We just got approval from the board that we're going to be providing public Wi-Fi to low-income, underserved communities across the county by deploying county-provided wireless internet service. So basically, we're going to start using geospatial to determine where to mount the antennas to essentially flood that neighborhood that needs internet access with free Wi-Fi. And it's going to be done in a public-private partnership. We're not going to actually build all that stuff. That'll be the vendors, but we're going to basically force those companies that won't commercially see profit margins in those neighborhoods to go in. We're going to pay them to do it. And then those communities will get free or very cheap internet. That'll take some time to roll out, but we're starting that project. GIS was essential, geospatial modeling, and by extension, the remote sensing to get the 3D models of the topography and the buildings and all that stuff, essential to doing that kind of analysis. There's more mundane things like we want to know whose property has what value so we can get our taxes, because that's where our money in government comes from, is tax assessments, right? There's a stormwater fee that passed in LA County a few years ago, Measure W. If you are a homeowner, you may know of this. You pay a certain small fee on your property based on the impermeable surface area that your property has. So if you have, 1,000 square foot parcel, that'd be really small. A 5,000 square foot parcel, I don't know. And 23% of it is impermeable, meaning roofs, pavement, things like that, versus grass, dirt, things like that, where the water can infiltrate. You pay a per square foot fee on the impermeable part. How did we do that? Imagery, remote sensing, image classification. We look at and how do we update that? We do it again. So lots of things like that where this stuff comes into play. I could go on for 3 years, but we don't have 3 years. So, as I said, what we do is always location based. Everything happens at an address, a parcel, a jurisdictional area, a park boundary, a city boundary, a county boundary. And what's interesting, and I alluded to earlier, is a lot of the people who do data in government don't think of it as geospatial. They think of it as a data set that they stuck in Excel. And just as an aside, some of you have probably heard me complain about this before. Excel is not a database. Excel is a spreadsheet. It's done. It was built to do accounting. Use a database if you want databases. But I haven't got that message to 110,000 county staff. 90% of the time when somebody comes to our team and wants to do some kind of an analysis involving maps, they hand us a spreadsheet. Like, here's our data. And it's a really badly formatted, non-normalized, non-clean spreadsheet that needs a lot of work. So, you know, we try to help people, educate people that spreadsheets aren't necessarily the best. Over the last few years, we've transitioned many of those departments and those staff to use something like Survey 123, you know, the data collection tool, to collect their data. And then it goes into a database and it's ready to map, and it's great. You know, so, you know, it's a never-ending process. But what's come of that is almost everyone's starting to see, oh yeah, when we go collect some data on trees in the park or the homeless count or whatever it might be, that's all happening in space. We should capture an address or a lat long or a coordinate of some, you know, or a location of some sort, and that should be part of the data set. Then it can be correlated back against all these other data sets. And when they don't have that, we can do the geocoding to sort of force that, right? We get the data set or the Excel sheet and we do the cleanup and the geocoding, and then we can say, oh, okay, well, those points now we know they're in that park, they're in that neighborhood, they're in that jurisdiction. And that makes it, you know, a lot more useful in a lot of ways. A couple other things I'll touch on just on the general geospatial, and then I'll get into the remote sensing stuff. We have a system called CAMS, Countywide Address Management System. It's, the links is here, and I'll share the links, Ken, with and the slides with you to share with your members. But this is a publicly available, there's web services and endpoints, or you can just access it directly to find addresses anywhere in the county. Now, why do we care about addresses in a system like this that serves up? Because now when we get a 911 call, we can find where to go. When we want to go do a maintenance call on a, you know, a pothole, we can find where that is. Whatever that might be. Every address is, you know, we need to know where it is. And while it may not seem obvious, addresses change really frequently across the counties, large as ours. There's new subdivisions being built in the outlying unincorporated areas all the time. So every time somebody builds a new subdivision, there's, you know, a few hundred new addresses. We have to get those in. If it happens in a incorporated city, one of the 88 cities, the city has to get that update to the county, and then the county can update it, because ultimately the county is the authoritative source. We're responsible to have all the addresses right. We're responsible to roll those up to the state and the national 911 systems and all that other stuff. So we have to coordinate across not just our own people, but also 88 cities. It's never perfect, but it's, you know, it keeps getting better, is what I'd say. But this system has a public facing website and services, and you can hit this thing to find an address in the county. Sometimes, well, usually more quickly than that address will show up on your Apple map or your Google map on your phone, because guess where they get their addresses for their maps? From there. So we update ours, and then once a year or something, they come in and hit our services and say, hey, we want to do a pull of your full data set. And we say, okay, great. And then they update their maps. So, you know, and that's true all over the country. Those kinds of commercial systems take government data from the local jurisdictions, roll it up, you know, package it in their pretty interface, and then they share it out. So, you know, a couple other mapping examples. Bobcat Fire a couple of years ago now, or a year and a half, I guess it was. You know, we use this to also look at, you know, combined with the fire perimeter mapping that comes from airborne remote sensing and the on the ground mapping, and knowing the addresses and the types of, you know, buildings and stuff. Where do we need to do evacuations? Where do we repopulate when things are getting better after things calm down? I'm sure this same thing is driving what's going on in Florida right now with Hurricane Ian. You know, there's, if you've watched the news at all, they talk about evacuation zones A through like T. Know your zone. I don't know. Anyone watch the Weather Channel? I mean, they were trying to show where on the website to find your zone. It's like 4 or 5 menus deep. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how is anyone going to find this? And then the newscaster says, and if you have older parents who don't know how to use the internet, you need to help them. I'm like, yeah, because even somebody who knows the internet would have a hard time figuring this out. We've tried to do something a little cleaner than that and easier, but when we have these emergencies, we now roll out web maps. People can type in their address and it says, yeah, you need to evacuate, or no, you can't, you don't need to evacuate yet, but be ready, or hey, you can go back now. The color codings of apps. And we do this by pre-analyzing risk zones and traffic patterns and access routes, so we can kind of manage that. Our emergency operations office really drives that, not the enterprise GIS, but it's all built in. We can figure out where we need shelters, and other things. And hopefully you haven't had to deal with fires, but if you had, or if you do, this shelter with a little puppy on it will let you bring your pet. Whereas maybe, this shelter with a little horse on it will let you bring your horse. So people in rural areas with different types of livestock or animals need to know, if I'm evacuating and I'm bringing animals, where can I take them? Where's a place I can put my horses for a week while I, ride this thing out? Where do I go? Where can I go with my pet if I have a cat or a dog? So that's kind of, the stuff we build into these systems. COVID, of course, drove a lot of stuff. I'm not going to dwell on it too much because we're all sick of COVID, but we had a whole bunch of applications. Some have remained since COVID because of other value they have. I mean, testing sites, and COVID dashboards less important, but access to things like beaches and trail closures during COVID now is just a good mapping tool for where are beaches and trails I might want to go visit. Cooling centers certainly are an ongoing issue. We have things on food resources and other things. So, if I'm looking for food resources, where can I go to get that stuff? So lots of dashboards that we spun up through COVID came out of all this geospatial. And then I already alluded to the digital divide a little bit. This is actually the map, if you're curious. Based on the FCC data I was complaining about earlier in class before we started this part, the darker the purple, the higher population with no internet access. It's not that they don't have it because they just don't want to have it. It's because it's not there. You can't get internet in most of these places. And if you look here, south, south of LA, South Central, some of the, the valley, it's not the rich people on the coast, it's not the rich people in some of the other suburbs. The internet providers are happy to give them fiber for, $80, $100 a month. But those other places can't pay for it, so that's why they don't have it. They're not going to run the infrastructure to serve it. So yeah, that's where we're going to go. But what we did in COVID, and again, something that'll evolve from that, is early on, everyone's like, where can I get on Wi-Fi? My kids got homework they need to do. They need to log into school. I need to log in to apply for some assistance or whatever. We built this Wi-Fi locator to help people figure out Wi-Fi. It's a very simple web application where we scraped public and private sources for where's there free Wi-Fi. All the boring yellow and green dots, yellow is McDonald's, green is Starbucks. So it also tells where every McDonald's and Starbucks is in the county. But they all have free Wi-Fi. So we were letting people know. You could search by distance and say, hey, show me all the Wi-Fi within a mile of my address. And it would give you, in the list there, places you could go. We did this in English and Spanish. So for those who might be interested in that, more for the students, Esri has localization in a lot of their apps. You can change, you can code into your apps and change it to any language you want. It changes all the buttons, all the menus. It doesn't change your own content. So your database stays in English if it's created in English, but you can have another column translated to another language and change the pop-up to pull that other column. So COVID forced us to learn how to do multilingual mapping applications, which was kind of challenging, and it's getting better. So that's another tool. This one will evolve, and be retained over time because people always want Wi-Fi. And then location analytics. A lot of this was what fed into early on, just getting kids to Wi-Fi for school. But again, it's going to feed into some of these other analyses for public facing Wi-Fi we're going to be spinning up. Developing a 15-minute walk zone around metro stations. So if we can get, somebody to the station, where can they go within 15 minutes? If we put Wi-Fi at a library, who can get there within 15 minutes, either from their house or a nearby station? So we did a lot of these analytics to drive that stuff. So this is all metro stations in gray, 15-minute walks, and these are all like public Wi-Fi in parks in blue. So you can see, well, okay, there's only a few places over here they intersect. This doesn't really help you, but you can get on the bus here, go out here, get Wi-Fi. That may not be ideal. So maybe we should get some Wi-Fi closer into the city. So that's what we're working on. Okay, so there's a million things we can do with geospatial data. We know that, right? So the question is, where do we get the data? And of course, the analysis we do is only as good as the data we feed it, right? If we have lousy data like the FCC broadband data is now, tells me, for those who weren't here when I said it earlier, if there's a house in a census tract that can get access to internet within 7 days of you calling the service provider, they have Wi-Fi, high-speed Wi-Fi in that entire census tract. That's what the FCC currently says. So when you look at an internet broadband coverage map of the United States or LA County, everybody has high-speed internet. It's like, well, not really, but how do you get past that problem? That's bad data, so you can't make good choices or good decisions about how that's done. So we want to look for better data. So there is the old-fashioned boots on the ground approach, and we can go out there and collect data on paper. Still, some do on mobile apps, all that sort of stuff. And there's a lot of this that happens, right? You go to a clinic and you check in, and they ask you your address and some other demographic information, and that ends up in some database. Or you go get a permit for a building permit to put a deck on the back of your house. That ends up in a database somewhere with your address, and then the assessor's office knows, and they can up your assessment and all that. So lots of data just comes in through the traditional channels, and that's not going to go away. But I think for us, especially since I've been with the county now 4.5 years or so, one of the things that I said when I came into the county, actually in my interviews, was you guys have some amazing remote sensing programs in LA County, and you don't leverage them. You collect a lot of data with airplanes primarily at that time. Now we're getting into drones and there's satellites too. And you're not getting the value that you invest in this stuff. So we should look for ways to improve that. I'm going to start just because of scale with drones. The official term is sUAS. Everyone knows that, right? Small unpersoned aerial systems. Because you can't ride these things. They're not air taxis yet. Although I guess Ken says they're going to make these hybrid cars that fly soon. So then we'll have our air taxis. I've seen some of them out there on the internet. They look very cool. I'm not going to ride it. That's just me. So we have a bunch of county departments that have started using drones over the last few years. I would say first, it was emergency services. It was fire and sheriff. In general terms, their uses of drones is very different than most of us who do mapping and analysis of data, because in a fire situation or a policing situation, you're usually using the drone to collect real-time data. Got a camera that's feeding back to the pilot, and you're looking at the data coming in on the screen or in the command center because you're watching the fire, or you're watching the crowd control, or whatever it is, or the bad guy that you're chasing. It's kind of like what you see on the nightly news with the helicopters following the car chase every night. I still don't get that. But as we started talking to those departments and then others getting interested, I started trying to explain to them, if you fly your drone the right way, you do overlapping, images like I showed you in the earlier lecture. So you get the stereo, you get the complete coverage. You can do point clouds and mapping from that. There's a lot more possibilities. So other departments now are starting to use drones. Public Works is one of our big ones. They use it in a lot of contexts for project level management and planning. Our regional planning department's got a whole big drone program going. I think they have 12 drones now, and a bunch of people have their 107 licenses so they can fly. I think fire has, a couple dozen people with licenses, and they have a bunch of drones as well. So they're starting to be all over the place. So what it means, we've got a great platform for flying sensors around in different ways, but also a real need for education around what do you do with these images once you capture them? It's one thing to get the imagery, it's another thing to actually, your camera's ringing. No worries. Okay. So just a couple of quick examples. Woolsey Fire, which was, I guess 4 years ago now, 4 years ago this last November. It's the first fire I was here. That was the first time the fire department was really seriously doing drone work. So they'd go out and they weren't doing it to monitor the fire progression. They do that from aircraft still, which makes sense because fires are big, but they were doing it for damage assessment. So here's an example. This is an area up near Malibu, neighborhood in a place called Trancas Canyon. If anyone happens to know where that is, I could point to it on a map, but until we went there, I wouldn't have been able to tell you either. But what you can see here, just in the imagery that's on the lower right, is this is a neighborhood in a fairly steep canyon with a dead end road, one way in, one way out. It dead ends up at the top of the canyon, then exits down at the bottom. There's a couple of side streets that go up into some side canyons, but basically everything's in there. And you can see just from looking at that image, wow, you lose the vegetation there, you're gonna have landslide risk because there's lots of steep slopes with bare soil now. And if you can't see it probably that well in the picture here, but if you look closely, you can actually see houses are either 100% intact, partially damaged, or fully destroyed pretty easily. And where this became really important from a practical sense was before the Woolsey fire, before we were flying imagery, the damage assessments that we had to do to assess the status of the home and maybe give them permits to do cleanup and rebuilding, which you have to wait for before you can do any of that stuff, was very slow because it involved people physically going and looking at every house on the ground. Now we can go fly. We flew this whole canyon. I don't know how many houses, probably 80 houses in that canyon. We flew it in half an hour. We came back to the office. We could process out that 3D model in a couple hours, get the data ready, and an analyst could go in and look at the imagery and pick out the damaged or destroyed houses, the same day. And they didn't have to drive out there house by house with notebooks and write down a bunch of stuff. This is now more typical of how we can do damage assessments after emergencies, which is really good because it's quicker to do it, which means people get their permits to clean up and rebuild, and their insurance stuff can go through quicker. So it's better for everybody. It's not just about making us get done quicker. It's about the constituency that we're serving be able to get back on with their lives as quickly as possible. So it was pretty interesting, and we got these fire guys all excited about drones and mapping and GIS, and they had never done this stuff before that fire, so that was kind of exciting. Another place has been picked up by our planning department is in enforcement for property inspections around different kinds of things, for permitting, illegal dumping, for looking at things on rooftops like cooling towers or cell phone antennas or other infrastructure that are on tops of buildings in various types. When you want to look at things on a site like this junkyard, or I guess it's a metals recycling facility, I should use the right term. Somebody has to go out there and walk around and look for stuff, make sure it's in compliance or it's not, if something's not right and what they're going to write up. Same kind of thing here. They can fly a site with a drone, get a full record, which of course for enforcement is important because now you have a permanent record. We went on this day, we captured this data, it's there. We've got this unbiased view of the data set that we can go back to, say if there's a debate about whether that was really going on. But the thing in the right-hand picture that was most interesting for our enforcement folks in planning was they noticed something that they would not have noticed walking around on the ground. They were on the ground there because they were flying the drones and they were doing the site inspection at the same time. They saw this stuff in the circle, which you can't see it from where you sit very well, but that's gas tanks from cars that they would take off the cars, chuck up on the roof of the building so no one can see them on the ground. Those are hazardous waste because gas tanks, by definition, they had fuel in them, they're hazardous waste. They got away with something like that, presumably for many years, because when an inspector came out, they couldn't see them. They were up on the roof. But now that they fly a drone over the site, they're like, hey, what's that? Oh, let's zoom in. Oh, those are a bunch of gas tanks. We have a problem here. So it started to make both the efficiency better, but also the opportunity to find things that were hard to find or dangerous to find. You might not even want to climb up there on a ladder to look for that, because that looks like a pretty rickety building. Now we can start to see that. Now, what's missing in this step of enforcement, because it's difficult, at least right now, is automating that. So it's one thing to go fly the imagery at a site like this and say, we have an enforcement violation that we need to write up and deal with. But it'd be great if we could get the machine learning to actually identify that's an anomalous, feature in the site, and we should be able to flag that automatically. We're not there yet, but that could be a future application. So this is still in the case of the damage assessment for fire, in the case of these illegal dumping situations. There's still a lot of manual work, but the difference is now you can have people do this at their desktop in the office. So one inspector can virtually visit multiple sites flown by maybe a technician with a drone license going out to a bunch of sites over the course of a week and saying, okay, here's 50 sites I flew last week. And now the assessor, the planning department folks can just look at those images sitting in the office. They don't have to all go out there multiple times and revisit and all that stuff. So the other place, I don't know, picture of property encroachments is another interesting one I was surprised to learn about when I came to government. People who live up against parks, like, I don't know, county parks, Griffith Park, wherever, if you watch their property over the years, it often grows into the park. They just keep sort of pushing their backyard further and further into the public space. And again, hard thing to find if you're not, if you're not out there in their yard looking at it, right? I mean, there's no reason somebody from Parks and Recs is going to go to your house, knock on the door and say, hey, can I look at your backyard, and see if you went into the park, land, extended your yard further out than it was supposed to go. But now you get aerial imagery and you get multiple images over time. You can overlay the property boundary on that imagery and see if, hey, the lawn's 20 feet further beyond the boundary line than it's supposed to be, and that's on public land in a park. Now we know there's a problem. You don't have to ever go to your house. In fact, we can automatically look at those kinds of things with image classification and say, this looks like a change that we need to be concerned about. So we don't have to go down the row of every house on the street to check it. We just look at the imagery. And we look at last year's imagery, this year's imagery, next year's imagery, and we can find out. So for these encroachments, which I was shocked to learn people would do that, but apparently they do, that's a great application of remote sensing. I'm going to give a quick example from the last cohort here in the program. You may have heard there is a homelessness population issue around LA County. We're not unique, but we get a lot of press locally for it. And in fact, I think just in the last week or so, there was some stuff in the news about maybe the homeless count didn't do a very good job because somewhere up near Venice Beach, they missed like all the homeless people and said there were 0. And that's a place that's well known to have a ton of people that aren't, that are on the streets and not, there's more than 0 for sure. So we know the homeless count traditionally has been questionable, not because it's intentional necessarily. It's done by people going out in the field with tablets, or actually before COVID with paper, and tallying up how many tents or people they see sleeping on the streets on a given night in January each year. So it's a very manual process. It's a 1-day or 2-day snapshot at a certain time of year, and that's how we get our estimates. So again, last year, as we were looking at this in the county, and I brought it to the cohort here, I said, well, could we do a better job? And it's not just the homeless count that we do traditionally, which is done only by volunteers who drive the streets or walk the streets. So if you're hiding behind a building, not on the street, or you're in a park or in a wash along one of the rivers, they don't go walk those channels. They don't go through the parks in the middle of the night looking for people sleeping under trees or behind bushes. They just go on the streets. So anyone hiding out, so to speak, in those other kinds of places is automatically being missed. And even on the streets where you might see their tent or their structure, it's only as good as the people who can walk down the street and tally them up. So we did an experiment with a team last year in this program where we wanted to look at in these off-road areas, in particular places that are at risk of flood or fire. If there were a flood or a fire coming through and you've got a whole population of people, in an encampment, you want to know they're there so you can evacuate them before they wash away, before they are caught up in a fire. So this is just one tile, but you can see on the left here, that's just the ortho image from a drone over an area near the Whittier Narrows. And you can see very clearly there's a bunch of tents and tarps and things. There's trash and other stuff scattered in among the trees. Could we teach the computer through machine learning methods to extract out the structures that might be actually where people are living? So they did a lot of great research and coding and writing all the scripts and stuff to do it, to take that raw image, convert it to a hue saturation value image, which is just a recoding of the image in essence, and then doing some masking to take out things that were clearly not candidates for structures that a homeless individual might be living in, and then a blob detection filter that looked for big enough blobs that could actually be structures. And this worked pretty darn well. So now the next step is going to be for us to try and implement this, at a larger scale. But if this works in places where you have encampments that are occluded by vegetation or other stuff, under trees, it certainly should work well in open view encampments or along the streets or the sidewalks. So again, an opportunity to move from field-based work to automated remote sensing-based work. It's not going to be perfect, but it's probably going to be better than missing all of Venice Beach, which we saw last week. Oops, wrong one. Okay, so I want to turn a little bit to our premier program in the county called LARIAC. The students are at least a little bit familiar with this already. So LARIAC is our Los Angeles Region Imagery Acquisition Consortium. It's been around for a while now, but what it is in a nutshell, in that blurb at the top, is we have a consortium of many of our cities, universities, community colleges, other governmental agencies that about 15 years ago now came together to say, hey, instead of us all collecting our own imagery on our own timeframes, at our own costs, at our own specs and scales and systems, why don't we all pool resources, come together and get one consistent imagery data set across all 4,000 miles of the county, and then we'll share it. And that way, we don't have gaps when we cross jurisdictional boundaries. All the imagery is the same date, the same scale, the same bands, everything's consistent. So it's an efficiency thing, it's a consistency thing, it's a comparison over time thing that just is much more efficient. And everyone was using aerial imagery already, right? Most of at least the larger cities across the county would contract for imagery. The county would, Caltrans would, all these big government agencies, Metro and so on. So coming together made sense. Which you can see on the left, you guys saw it earlier, is just one tile of ortho imagery in a false color infrared. So we can see the vegetation in red. We can see the artificial turf in the center is green because it's not real vegetation. You see the houses and the roads and all these other structures. So we have a good basis of data. The other thing LARIAC gives us, though, is this web tool called Connect Explorer that lets us do a lot of analytics against the imagery just in a web browser or on a mobile app in the field. So either way, if I'm in the field, I can pull that same thing up based on my GPS. It'll show me where I am. And I can pull up imagery going back to the beginning of LARIAC. So I can look at a time series of imagery anywhere in the county across, a dozen or so years. I can make measurements directly on the imagery in length, width, height, area, slope, planimetric distance, all kinds of stuff. I mean, there's a whole bunch of tools. You can see some of them in that toolbox. And I can do, comparisons between dates side by side, all kinds of fun stuff. I can also annotate and add, information on top of this to build my own database. So if I'm doing field work or desktop work, I can now use this sort of an interface to make measurements, add information, annotate things, and build out a database. And this is available to all of our LARIAC members. So all the cities, the county employees, all of you students at Long Beach is a LARIAC member. You all have access to this. And it's the entire county over a whole bunch of years of LARIAC. So it's pretty cool. So, as I said, it's a little more than 15 years now that it's been going since 2005. And there's imagery collected in early years every 3 years. So they flew every third year near the beginning of the year around January through March timeframe and did that countywide collect. So we're in our 6th cycle concluding this year. But what's changed in the last couple of cycles, LARIAC 5 and 6, is we started doing more frequent captures. So in LARIAC 5, we did a couple extra captures. In LARIAC 6, we did, we did our primary capture, and then we did 4 more. So we did like different seasons, and multiple times per year. Our most recent collect was actually finished about a month ago. So you can see what, somewhere in LA County it looked like in, August or September, as opposed to January or last year or 10 years ago. So great for doing change analysis. As I said, we have our members, are generally pretty stable. Some new ones come in. Sometimes people skip a cycle. But the advantage of a program like this, is obvious. We save money by collaborating and pooling resources. We save overhead a lot. But more importantly, I think is we're able to share the analysis, the best practices, the utility of this data across all these members. So we have an annual, typically, not in COVID time, but typically an annual meeting of the members. The cities and the counties and the other members come together and share things. We do trainings and other things. It's really cool. And we derive a number of products from LARIAC that are really useful too. I'll talk a little bit about some of those. So one of the the valuable things out of LARIAC is we get topographic models of the county. So that's done 2 different ways. In the typical LARIAC cycle, this is a photogrammetric point cloud based model. So again, we're getting high overlap stereo coverage across the county. We get 2-foot contours countywide. That's useful. And then we get change analysis when that is affected by major events, whether that's a landslide or that's a construction project. If there's big earth moving operations, a new subdivision, and they regrade everything, we can get that updated topography out of the next flight with the photogrammetric method. On occasion, we do LiDAR flights. So LiDAR being the laser profiling of the landscape. Then we get the point cloud from the LiDAR. The advantage there being it gets penetration through tree canopy, it gets to the ground everywhere pretty much. So we get a more accurate base map or surface topography. And with LiDAR, we also then get first return, top of canopy, top of buildings. We get more accurate heights and other measurements out of it in that sense. So LiDAR is expensive. We don't have any LiDAR in space yet. Some of you guys maybe can help us with that because it's an active sensor. It's hard to do. The U.S. Geological Survey has a program called 3DEP that I'm involved with, that committee. That's goal is to have LiDAR across the entire United States at no gaps. I think it's by 2026 or 8, I forget the year. But we have, and then to have a repeat on a regular enough basis to be useful. So we're on the cusp here in LA County of being up for another LiDAR flight, probably in 2023 or 2024. So we'll do that, a new one. And when we do a new one, it'll be a higher quality flight. Last time we flew 2 points per square meter, QL2 data. Next time we're going to do QL1 data, that'll be 8 points per square meter. So we'll get more, more points hitting the ground, more detail out of that data set. So we'll be able to get more, more resolution out of the library. And all the derived products that can come from that: building footprints, building heights, tree canopy heights, detailed ground topography, and all the others. The other thing we did, it's been a few years, on the right is a land cover classification map. This is a very typical remote sensing product. Spaceborne systems, we've done this with Landsat for a long time. This is just a more detailed one from aerial imagery. So this is the map that led to the assessments for Measure W, for the impermeable surface fee assessments. So we took a land cover classification to categorize, different kinds of land cover as shown here, but then the Public Works Stormwater Division took those data and just binned them into permeable and impermeable. So if it was a vegetation type or a water type, that's all permeable. If it was a structure or a paved surface, that's impermeable, and kind of bin those out to build that fee assessment, and then cross-reference that against parcels, got square footage, and tallied up everybody's fees. Now, of course, that's not a static thing, right? People change what's going on their property. So this is another place where we're going to have to do regular updates through machine learning methods to train and classify every pixel in the county and reallocate how much impermeable surface every parcel has on some regular basis. So that's a process we'll work out the next iteration of that now, and that's drawn off the LARIAC imagery. So that's kind of a practical use. I assume most of you know what this is. Dr. Stadium, no one's gonna yell it out. It's audience participation. But what comes out of here, the yellow outline, this is one of our derived products that we pull from the imagery as well. That's a building outline. A stadium's kind of a weird thing to call a building, but it is, it's a structure. And you can see, even though we've got heavy shadowing, because we've got lots of image tiles that overlap, we can find the edges of the buildings from the imagery. So if it's shadowed here, it's not shadowed in the next one, stuff like that. But the other thing we do is a change analysis. Every 3 years that we do our building footprints, we also look at, is it a building that was there last time? It's outlined in yellow. Is it a new structure? It's in green, some of those. Is it there's not a stadium, I don't think it showed up. Is there a structure missing? Something was demolished or removed in some form. It'll put the old outline there in red and say, okay, that one's not there anymore. So we have a regular automated process where we get new building footprints every 3 years, and we can see significant changes, additions, deletions to buildings. Again, the assessor's office loves this for saying, oh, you added on to your house and you didn't tell us. We need to reassess you, or you didn't have a permit, or, whatever. So there's all kinds of things there that are practical, but it's also useful for getting, other planning things, as I said, looking at building heights, looking at building zoning, all this other stuff. So again, LiDAR and imagery from LARIAC sort of come up with those derived products. So change assessment. I'll just show you a quick few images. So this is downtown LA, Hall of Administration, Grand Park. What is that? The Dorothy Chandler Pavilion over there. And can't see it in this image, but down on the left would be LA City Hall at the other end of the park. So here I'm just going through a series of years of development between 2002 and roughly the present, just to give you an idea. You can see the change over time as we look at different images. They're not all aligned here because I just did quick screenshots, but what you can see as we get into the mid 2000s is that park starts getting ripped up. They did a major redevelopment of the park downtown there outside of the Hall of Administration. And then they brought it back and put in these new fountains in the middle. Now, and what you can see here too is these are oblique images. One of the other cool things with LARIAC, these are airplane-based or airborne-based image collections. The camera system that our vendor flies for this has both an ortho, a straight down looking camera, and oblique 45-degree angle looking cameras in all 4 cardinal directions. So we can look at every location in the county from all 4 directions and sort of spin around that. see each side of a building or each side of a hill or whatever it might be. And we can still do all the measurements I alluded to earlier. I can measure, the height, the slope, the distance, the area, all that stuff off the imagery directly. Or if you want to bring this stuff into image processing software and do fancy stuff with, machine learning that as well. So that's an option. So you can sort of see change over time. Like this big parking lot, sort of just left the center. You can see that got, ripped down and made into new buildings. So lots of change stuff by having these frequent, regular, consistent image data sets. The Bobcat fire I alluded to earlier, it was kind of our most recent big fire. Nice picture off of Wikipedia to give credit to some random person who took it. But what I want to show you here is the other interesting thing of change detection. So this is the parking lot at Devil's Punch Bowl. Anyone ever go there hiking? Know the area? Okay, one person. So, it's kind of a nice area up in the National Forest. It's a county park. And you can see in this picture, there's, some buildings there. There's an amphitheater up here, north of the parking lot. There's a couple of buildings, visitor center, storage buildings, things like that, and the parking lot. Well, the Bobcat fire came through this area, and the Parks Department people called me up, like the day it happened, and said, do we have any imagery to look at damage assessment? Well, now, had this been the Woolsey fire 3 years earlier, I would have said, well, if you can get somebody out there with a drone to fly it, we would, and then you could do the damage assessment or whatever you want. But in this one, I could say, oh, I worked with one of our corporate, vendors out there called Vexcel Imaging. They're one of the big national, aerial survey companies, imaging companies. They have a program called Gray Sky where they for governments give free data post-emergency, and it's just available. And we are hooked up to their web service and we can grab the imagery right now. What the Gray Sky program is, just informational. They call it Gray Sky because they put their planes up while the skies are still smoky. They don't wait for blue sky conditions, which would be your ideal for remote sensing, right? You don't want haze and scatter and all that stuff. But in an emergency, you don't want to wait for the smoke to clear on the blue skies. So they fly literally as soon as they can safely get a plane in the air that doesn't interfere with fire operations, usually within a day or two. So the Gray Sky program then produces the imagery, and I just have this as a screenshot from the swipe tool. And they do 4 bands, so you get red, green, blue, and then near infrared. So this is the false color infrared. And just glancing at this scale, you can already see some of what's going on. The trees right there to the right of the parking lot are still, for the most part, looking pretty good. They're still green or red in this case because of the near infrared reflectance. If you look at some of the trees further out, and I'll scroll back, there were trees up, around the amphitheater. They're a little brownish or greenish because they're not, the brightest growth time of the year. But there's very little, other than a couple of wisps of reddishness in here. There's very little that looks like it's living anymore. So you can already see that. You can also, if you look closely, see some of the buildings changed. So there was a building, the one with the red dot on it, because hey, it was destroyed. You can see it. And here's just a zoom in of the parking lot area. You can see it more closely. So, this imagery, and this is a long drive to get out there. I don't know how long it would take to send people to go out and do an on-ground assessment, to get all the way out there, do the field work, come back, enter the data, blah, blah, blah. We could do this from our desktops in the office, pretty much a day or two after, the event happened anyway. So from an efficiency standpoint, this kind of rapid imagery collection and rapid assessment becomes a really powerful tool in emergencies, but not just emergencies. So this is a neat thing. And I haven't looked at it yet, but Vexcel's Gray Sky program, for those who are lucky to be in government like me, when you get access to it, you get access to their full national data set. So I can actually go home and look at Hurricane Ian and see the damage assessment imagery probably later this weekend. They'll have imagery after that, post-hurricane imagery up on their service, and I can just pull it up on my web map in Esri, and voila, it'll be fun. So maybe I'll show you something if I get time to look at it after that. So a couple other things I want to touch on here. You know, there's other things we can do with remote sensing data. Obviously, we can look at, you know, other types of data, other perspectives. We can look at data extractions with feature extraction, machine learning in different ways. Obviously, just better efficiency and speed of processing. I've already touched on some of that, and some other applications. So I want to touch on some of those things we're moving towards and already starting to do. One is street level imagery, which may not sound that interesting or foreign to you because you've seen Google Street View. But in government, Google Street View is not that useful because their cameras aren't very good and they're not certified, corrected, and fully, you know, measurable data. They're pretty pictures. This imagery comes from a vendor. We did a pilot study in Lariac with a couple of years ago now, and we're going to put out an RFP to vendors later this fall to do this countywide. This is street level imagery that is mapping grade. So there's a number of vendors out there that collect these 360-degree hemispherical images as they drive down the street. You've seen those cars driving around every so often. They also have LiDAR sensors on the roof of the car, so they get a 360 hemisphere of a 3D point cloud. So they can actually map the imagery to real space. And just like the Lariac imagery I showed you earlier, in these web tools they provide, you can measure heights, you can measure lengths, you can measure areas, you can measure distances within, you know, sub-centimeter accuracy. Because this particular company, they're driving a 250 megapixel camera on the roof of the car and LiDAR systems. And they're collecting that in, you know, every direction all the way around the car and, you know, the full hemisphere above. So you can look up literally, because I've done it, you can look up at a street light and read the wattage code off the lamp and know what light bulb you need to take out there if you're the public works department to replace it. You can know how high it is, so you know which cherry picker you need to get up that high. You can look at under a bridge, you know, and see if there's rust or damage or, you know, something going on. You can actually, in these tools, also flood the landscape to some height and see if I have clogged up sewers on this street and I have so much rainfall, am I going to end up flooding people's houses before planning our street cleaning or sewer, you know, entrapment cleaning. So what we've done for a long time from aerial imagery, now we're bringing actually down to the ground and looking at doing the same thing at the ground level, but at that high quality mapping grade that we've been used to from the air. Here's a couple other screenshots. So these tools, just like aerial imagery, we can do all the feature extraction, and we did, again, some experiments. So every point on this upper right corner, the green dots are where a picture was taken. And so you can click on those and zoom to that picture. But every other color up there is an asset, a street light, a wheelchair ramp at a corner, a crosswalk sign, a street sign, a park bench, whatever's along the street that we see that we want to extract out. So using, again, typical sort of machine learning feature extraction methods, we can build an entire geospatial database of assets, street side assets and in-street assets, and nobody has to go in the field. We can map every street sign in the county, and instead of it taking literally years to go visit and revisit all those signs and decide if they need to be replaced or whatever it may be, we can drive the whole county and get that database generated in a matter of months. So like I said, we're going to be putting out an RFP for vendors to bid on, but our expectation is we will drive in next summer 10,000 miles of LA County's unincorporated streets and alleys and everything, and get this kind of a database for every asset that we're interested in across the entire county. And because it's part of Lariac, we'll invite any of our cities that want to join in. You know, they can buy and get their cities out at the same time. So I would expect over the next few years, we'll see this kind of database regularly built for LA County, you know, probably every few years and updated. So the same kind of change analysis of street condition, asset condition, and so on will be much more readily available. The other thing that actually drove this, though, is this thing. That's a wheelchair ramp at a corner, right? Everyone can recognize that, I suspect. if you know, and I had to learn, anything about the Americans with Disabilities Act and the rules for street intersection curb cuts and ramps, they're super detailed. The slope of that ramp has to be, how deep it has to be, how wide the curb cut has to be. All those lines that you see overlaying are measurements that have to be taken to determine if one of these crosswalk ramps is compliant with ADA standards. The way that's done, not just for LA, but every local government in the country right now is they send a survey crew out. They set up their survey equipment, they shut down the intersection or put up at least some cones to keep from getting run over, and they survey each one of these. And if you can think about how many of these there must be in the world, your typical intersection potentially only has 4 if they're just doing 4 corners. Some corners have one going on that street and one going on that street because they do the each right angle. So maybe you have 8 of these ramps at a 4-way intersection. It can take a whole day for a survey crew to go do one intersection potentially. If it's a 8 ramp intersection, and if there might be some islands or boulevards in the middle, maybe even more. So there's no way to do it practically in a timely fashion. So again, using imagery and feature extraction and measurements, and this kind of data is actually good enough. They've already done this in New York City. They drive twice a year and they remap every asset, including their wheelchair. Now, they don't have the geography that we do. They don't have as many miles of road as we do. But that's our goal, is to move that way. Philadelphia does it too. So this is emerging technology just in the last few years that's really starting to come into the remote sensing realm. So it's not just flying up there, it's driving down here and getting similar tools out of this and similar analytics. Now, back to Airborne though, because that's where my heart is and many of yours. The other thing we're looking at that's a big deal, not just in LA, but certainly it's big to us, is the tree canopy. So these are great, I'll call them cartoons, sort of. Actually, this is real data from somewhere in Kentucky. I borrowed from a friend who's at a company I won't name, to map out tree species and tree condition. So you can kind of see in this map on the big one on the center, they've done species color coded, and that's why all the trees look nice. But these are actually based on LiDAR and imagery. So they get the tree shape, the structure, the branching, so they look like trees. And then on the right, separate, visualization, they do a health assessment of each tree as well. So they say, is it, green, yellow, or red? Is it fair to healthy? Is it stressed or is it super stressed? That we've been able to do for a long time with sort of NDVI analysis, looking at the vegetation indices, we could get a sense of stress. But combining species and condition is sort of the holy grail of urban tree mapping. Because again, right now, most places send an arborist out on the ground with a clipboard and they look at the tree and they assess it and they make notes and then it ends up in a database. The city of Los Angeles, not my jurisdiction, but the city of Los Angeles has an estimated 10 million public trees. And a public tree is a tree along a street or in a park, not the trees in anyone's yard or on private properties, business parks, or things like that, just the public trees. The average cost to send a consultant out, an arborist, to assess a tree is between $4 and $7. So you can hire, Davy Tree or one of those tree companies to come look at all your public trees, and for somewhere in the $4 to $8 per tree range, they will go around, drive around, and assess all your trees. So you can see where the math comes pretty quickly. For the city of LA, 10 million trees. Let's go with the $4. It's still $40 million to do a tree assessment, and how long is that going to take you to do 10 million trees? It's going to, it took them over a decade to go from their last tree map to their next tree map. Because you just can't do 10 million trees in a week, right? No matter how many people you put on it, it's going to take a long time. So perfect case for remote sensing, right? We can do this from aerial imagery, image classification, and we can do it more, presumably more frequently. So we're working on a project now in LA County, not very creatively called the Urban Tree Sensing Project. But hey, it's something. And as I said, we know we're okay to a degree, even though it's slow and expensive. knowing our public trees, because our public works folks get our street trees, our parks department gets our park trees as often as they can, given budgets and time. But what we don't know anything about is those private trees. Trees is, in people's yards, business parks, campuses of all sorts. And there's two reasons that might matter. And I'm not going to surprise anybody, I don't think. Reason one, when we're talking about urban heat island effects, which is a big deal with climate change and all the other concerns we have, and air quality, runoff, all these other things that trees provide service, environmental benefits from. It's not enough to just look at your public trees, because you can't assess the impacts of the urban heat island or stormwater runoff or air quality if you only look at that small fraction of the tree canopy that's public. The tree in your yard actually matters too. We want you to have trees in your yard. They contribute benefits. And we don't have necessarily the time, the money, or maybe even the access to go in your yard and look at all your trees anyway, if we were going to do that on the ground. It's just not feasible. So how do we do that? Well, aerial imagery will work. I can see the tree in your backyard from above in my LARIAC imagery. I don't need to ask permission to go in your yard. I'm not violating any privacy laws, actually. That's already gone through the Supreme Court. It's totally legal for me to look at the trees in your yard from the air. So let's do it. That's the idea. We can more frequently not just get our public trees, but maybe our private trees. We can get better information that feeds these things. The other place isn't just the heat island and the environmental stuff there. It's also insects or disease issues. So there's boring beetle, the shot hole oak borer that's infiltrated Southern California and is killing off large swaths of trees up in the national forests, but also down in the foothills and other areas. Dead trees are a problem. Any idea why? Fire is the big one, right? I mean, yes, we lose the shade, we lose the cooling, we lose all those environmental effects, but now we have dead trees are fuel for fires. Now we're going to get bigger fires, and then we get mudslides, and it's just a cascade of bad stuff. So the problem with these insect infestations, the shot hole borers or otherwise, is if you don't find the dead tree when it's the one tree that's been infested, and then the insect lays its eggs, and then millions of new insects come out next spring and spread out and kill hundreds of trees nearby, we often don't know there's an infestation until dozens of acres or hundreds of acres of dead trees pop up. Maybe because they're out of sight up in the national forest and you just don't even see it because no one's hiking through there, or maybe because it's just down in that valley a little bit out of sight from your neighborhood. But either way, if we don't know it because it's not a public tree that we're watching, that's a huge risk. So we want to know where we have dead and dying trees, so fire risk and all the other stuff too. So there's lots of obvious reasons. So this project, what we're doing is basically we said, well, we've got LARIAC data. We fly it every, minimally every 3 years in the older times, but now every year. We also have LiDAR data that gives us structure and height and other characteristics of trees. And there's some other data that's coming soon to a satellite near you. Right now, it's only in airplanes. The AVRIS system that JPL likes to fly around LA County is a test sensor, but that's going to go into space and hopefully in a few more years. They're on the verge of launching a hyperspectral sensor into orbit. So this project is sort of working on the assumption that if we can develop a workflow where we use LARIAC data, LiDAR data, and hyperspectral data that's really useful for getting health and condition of trees and species of trees, we can get the holy grail tree map. And if we get that workflow based on the airborne version of that, of AVRIS, when that's spaceborne and it comes over every week, we can update our maps through the season instead of only once a year or once every few years. That's really cool. And we solve all these other just practical issues of getting people, information they need. So our goals in this project are, again, we want to get species, we want to get canopy metrics, dense, crown size, fuel loads, all that sort of stuff, health. And we wanted to build this whole project out around data that's either free or already available, i.e. the LARIAC data that we fly. And then we're going to build this all out on open source tools so we can share it with the world when we're done. So, Orange County might want it too, and I live in Orange County, so I want them to want it. Ventura County might want it, go down the list. Lots of people need this sort of stuff. So I'm not going to get too into the weeds because this is a work in progress, and honestly, I need my PhD student to explain it because I can't do it. I have a PhD student at UCLA who's doing the heavy lifting of all the coding on this algorithm, and it's working quite well. But we've got the LiDAR data, as I said, on the, roughly every 10-year cycle with the new ones coming. He's using the old one. We've got the ortho photos from LARIAC. We have some old tree canopy mapping data from LARIAC that we can use to sort of help train the models. And then we've got this JPL sensor. So you guys probably aren't going to get to use hyperspectral data in class anywhere. Maybe some of our guests work with hyperspectral. I know the folks over at the Aerospace Corporation have some really cool hyperspectral sensors because I've gone and talked to them about them, but they didn't want to fly for us. If you're listening. So as I said, this sensor is currently being flown by JPL regularly over LA County just for their own tests, but they've been doing it for a long time. So we've got a history of data. It's 224 bands. So, your 4-band sensor or your 10-band sensor that you guys get to fly on the drones, this is way, way more narrow band detailed information than any sensor you're familiar with. It is coarse pixels, 20-meter pixels, because there's not enough energy in a narrow band, enough photons bouncing off the surface to do, 10-centimeter pixels. You won't get enough energy with that. So they're bigger pixels, but by using big pixels from Avris and small pixels, 10-centimeter pixels from LARIAC, we can do image fusion and sort of get the spatial out of LARIAC, the spectral out of Avris, and get the best of them. And image fusion is kind of a technique of merging different image types to get to that detail, and then throwing the LiDAR to get the structure data. So this is sort of the data sets we're working with. This is a very simplified version of the workflow, just to give you a sense of how we're tackling this. So we take our imagery, from these different things at the upper left there, and do some merges or fusions between those, and some subsetting based on land cover, so we can mask out water and other buildings and other things that are clearly not trees. No sense wasting energy classifying pixels we know are not trees. So masking is a great way to do that. And then they do some, we do some transforms on that fused data set to pull out the key information that we're after. And this is just using some convolution neural network methods. You can read about it in literature, some segmentation methods to basically pull out grounds, do the assessment of the spectral bands of the structure to get us to tree species, tree condition, tree size, tree structure. So it's kind of conceptually, it's an easy process. Computationally, it's pretty heavy. But we're doing this in 3 different parts of the county right now, down near the coastal zone, in beach area, in the foothill zone, and then somewhere in sort of a moderately urbanized zone to sort of get a sense. I don't remember the exact numbers John's getting right now, but he's been hitting 80 to 90% accuracy on his initial tests, which is as good as most traditional remote sensing methods would get. So if we can hit something at that level or better of accuracy and run that county-wide with these methods, we'll have the best tree map of any county in the world, probably, hopefully in the next year or 2. He's got to finish publishing all his papers and all that stuff, but stay tuned. So that's sort of exciting stuff. And this, I would say, just to step back from the details, is an example, much like the one I did on homelessness with the cohort last year, where we as government want to partner with academia, with private and public agencies of various sorts who have data sets like Bexel did for the fire mapping, or JPL does for the hyperspectral, or whoever. Building these sort of researching partnerships allows us to push the envelope of what we can do in local government. Most local governments would never go here either because they don't have the resources or the expertise, but the partnerships let us build those opportunities. And it honestly creates market opportunities for our partners in the private sector because they can show, hey, a big county like LA is finding use in our products, and that helps them. It helps us because we answer a question we need, and it helps the academic community because they get to do some, participate and help push the research and the development of these kinds of approaches. So I think it's a win-win-win, and anyone listening from private sector with cool data and systems, I'd love to talk to you. So I think just to sort of bring this home, because we're getting to that point, I think, hopefully I've given you a few examples. I could go on all night. There's lots of opportunities for us to take these remotely sensed image data sets, these other geospatial data sets, merge them together and do analysis in various ways to take what are pretty pictures for remote sensing and create useful data for decision. And that's, as I alluded to at the beginning, one of the things when I came to the county 4.5 years ago that really frustrated me early on was they spent a lot of money on Lariac and they didn't derive a lot of product from it. It was essentially a pretty picture that people used as a base map in their GIS work. They did a couple of feature extractions like building footprints, but pulling out trees, pulling out impermeable surfaces, pulling out other, pulling out encampments of populations that are in risk zones for fire or flood. Those are things that translate imagery and remote sensing into decision-making tools that we can really use. I think for all of you as students or practitioners, that's where we want to go. It's one thing to do all this fun geospatial remote sensing work because it's fun to play with. We do, we write some cool code, we do some cool analysis, but it's when we can actually impact people on the ground that I think it, really matters. It's actually why I left academia to go to government, partly, among other reasons. The other thing, though, I think that's interesting here is COVID taught us a really interesting lesson about the power of geospatial and remote sensing just as a tool set for government, because we suddenly were forced to figure out how to do our jobs without being able to go in the field, how to leverage imagery and remote sense data along with our other geospatial data. So we could do desktop assessments of properties or of, dumping violations or of encroachments or of homeless encampments or whatever it is. And I think what that's done is both raise the profile of the value of geospatial and actually, at least for LA County, I can say it's changed our workflows. We will not go back to doing some of these things in the field that we used to do in the field because we've shown the departments that benefit from that they can get much more efficiency and effectiveness out of their expensive and specialized staff if they can do the same job at their desk and don't have to spend 2 hours in traffic getting to and from a site to do an inspection. Because we all know LA traffic, right? If I am a field worker who's going to go visit 3 gas pumps to make sure they give me a gallon, or 3 gas stations, they probably all have multiple pumps, to make sure they give me a gallon of gas, or I'm going to go visit, a street full of trees to assess their condition and their, and you do a street tree map. I'm going to spend half my day in traffic and half my day doing real work. And by using remote sensing tools at my desk, I can get a full day of work doing assessments and not sit any time in traffic, which is more productivity, less carbon emissions, less risk of an accident driving around, less frustration, and our taxpayers are happier because they're getting actual stuff for their money, right? So I think it's a win-win, and I think we're going to keep seeing more of that. And as I said, there's lots more we can do. I think where we are going to go, some of the projects we're continuing to look at and starting to work towards at the county. Certainly lots more applications of change detection. It's obvious for things like buildings or tree condition, but looking at other kinds of change detection at the level of like cracks in the streets or missing street signs or smaller features that that we might not have thought about using remote sensing for in the past. The image quality, the image types, the platforms we collect data from, airborne drones at the site level or rooftop on a car. They all give us more possibilities to do this kind of assessment, some change detection analysis we couldn't do maybe 10 years ago, certainly, or even 5 years ago. We're also looking at a lot more either real-time or near real-time analytics. So, can we shorten the time from collection to decision, by capturing data close to the time and place the event or the need demands it, and put that through an analytical pipeline that lets us make a decision in a timely manner. We've done that with post-fire inspections, not having to send people on the ground. We can get your house assessed, your property assessed, and get your permits going without leaving the office. In fact, we can probably be more proactive and just say, hey, we looked at it and we know you need to do a cleanup and you need a permit because your house got burned down. Why do we have to wait for you to call us? We know you own that property. We know your address. We know your property was damaged because we looked at the imagery. We should be able to fire that off to you automatically. You shouldn't have to tell us your house burned down. So those kinds of things, getting more real time and emergency response and other contexts will be useful. And I think, the other exciting thing is getting more into the predictive modeling. Instead of waiting for something to happen, can we do change analysis and analytics on whatever it is to say, hey, it looks like this thing is starting to go bad. Let's fix it before it breaks. Whether that's the road needs to be resealed or repaved, or whether that's this tree is starting to look stressed. We need to go make sure there's not an infestation that needs to be treated before it spreads. The more we can get the data quicker and into predictive models, the more we can get ahead of these problems before the problems. So lots of stuff coming. I think we'll do that. Put the hurricane there because that's predictive modeling. How do they know where the hurricane's going to go? They've been showing us for a week. Look out, Tampa. You know what? Tampa didn't get hit, but the model is a little off. I think the hurricane model is better. I have to ask, did anyone see, if you were watching the news later this afternoon, Tampa Bay, because of the wind, the water is gone. It blew it all out of the bay. It's just mud. And the wind is so strong. No one put that in a predictive model. They were saying it's going to flood. It's the opposite. They don't have any water. The bay is literally empty. And they said it probably won't fill up again until tomorrow, until the wind dies down, because the wind's just pushing the water out. Can't get it. Crazy. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Okay. This is for the students. I had to put an album cover because I always do. I didn't put it on every slide. But I think, again, the technology is really cool. It's why we're all in it. It's why we work in imagery and mapping and, and feature, the analytics to do the machine learning and extraction, all that. But again, at the end of the day, it's about making the job more effective for us. So moving to the desktop, moving to the analytics and data-driven decisions. So we're not guessing, we actually know something, and really turn this stuff around quickly. So I already sort of said this, I got ahead of myself. So with that, a couple of parting things just for everyone, especially those who maybe aren't familiar with our data resources. We do have a lot of data that's public facing at LA County, as most government agencies do. So we have two ways to our data, data.lacounty.gov or gis.lacounty.gov. As of it's actually on the screen. There are 569 data sets through our open data portal. 499 of those are geospatial data sets, map data that you can link to. So if you want to do any kind of analysis related to maps in LA County, this is a publicly facing resource, not just to download data, but to hit REST endpoints, to hit services, so you don't have to pull data, you just connect to the live data in many cases. So there's a lot of good stuff for anyone out there that's working with analysis in the county. And I think that's the other piece I'd say is, at the end of the day, data is data. It doesn't tell us anything until we convert it into something useful. We've done a number of things, as I alluded to through the talk. Work on homelessness, work on broadband, work on a whole bunch of dashboards and tools for COVID related stuff, and the links are there. But again, I encourage anyone who's students or professionals, if there's stuff you want to do, one of the great values of government data is it's available. You can leverage it and use it and build your own applications or your own analysis. So love to see you do that, whether it's with us or just because of us making it available. I love to partner with folks and push the envelope for everyone forward, but I know there's also times that your applications may not be what we need, but you can still do them. They're useful for you. So I have to, of course, do this for our guests. As you know, hey, and I have them physically for us. But I think, I won't say any more about that other than they exist. They're available on fine booksellers everywhere. And with that, I will stop. I think I'm sort of right about where I'm supposed to be. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Hello, everyone. This is really exciting. I think you probably didn't realize actually Dr. Steinberg was doing here is actually the beginning and there's a core or many things to come. For example, you're doing the street thing. Of course, Google is doing also similar thing like smart cars, the IoT, and it's kind of smart city type of thing. I have well, people folks online, if there are any questions, please click raise hand, then we'll give you the mic access. So. But I have there's a Q&A. Wait a second, Pratik. Just I can do it here.
Technology is awesome.
Yeah, it is amazing. Pratik, let me see. Pratik, you can go ahead, speak out. Go ahead, Pratik. Hello?
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for the invitation. Excuse me. I had a question. So is there any public-private partnerships and projects that are being offered by the county, which would also be some publications?
Yeah, so I mean, as I said, where it's, where there's overlapping interests and opportunity, we love to do, pilot studies or research studies, like some of those I told you about here, where maybe we're using data sets or example, or tools, algorithms, things like that in collaboration with a private industry or academia to do those projects. And yeah, we do, where there is something interesting and appropriate, we love to publish too, sure. So like that work we're doing with UCLA on the tree mapping, that's already generating some publications and conference presentations and things like that. So, I think it's my history as an academic makes me, maybe more inclined to want to publish and do research than your average government employee. But it's certainly something we like to do because we don't want to keep it a secret. We want to share.
Great, thanks, Pratik. Folks online have any question, please click raise hand. Well, folks here, you can also welcome raise your hand.
Fine, ask me something really hard. Yeah.
Regarding the project that the last cohort did, the analysis of the unhoused people, was that closer to like a pilot project just testing out what the capabilities are, or is there a pathway to start setting that into like progress for LA County?
So I would say it's more of a pilot at this point because it was a very targeted data set. Because we had what we were doing because of student safety and and just general privacy issues for the people that are in those images. We only did it in a spot where we already had imagery and some field validation data from the county. So we don't yet know how that would translate into different environments. I mean, it was a pretty good environment in the sense that we had some encampments that were more exposed, some that were more occluded by the tree canopy, and we had a whole variety of different sort of structures. You have the traditional tents in multiple colors, and then you have the more created structures, found, materials and tarps and, whatever, which tend to be, again, in different colors as well. That team actually ran into some problems with particular colors of material not popping out as well. They got most of it, but, and then there are some issues about the occlusion by canopy that, you know, the blob detector only can go so far and say it's big enough to be a tent. Because if you make it too small, it might look like a tent, but it's actually just some trash or something that's not really big enough. So there's some additional work that I think we need to do there to really hone that algorithm down a little bit more to be reliable. The other thing I'd like to see us do, if we do follow-up work on that, is, and again, we need field data from the Homeless Initiative or LASA, would be to actually get a sense of, is there a relationship, the statistical relationship between the size of the structure and the number of occupants? Because it's not always one structure, one individual. It might be one structure, multiple individuals, or a whole family. So, you know, if we can sort of get that next level of reliable identify of the structures plus an estimate that's reasonable of the estimated number of people, then I think we can actually do far better than the traditional homeless counts that are done now. Because again, they don't go look in a tent, see how many people are there. They just say, yep, there's a tent there. Or yes, I see somebody sleeping on the street there. If they can see the individual, they can count them. Otherwise, you know, they're just guessing too. So, you know, nothing will be perfect, but I think my mantra on these kinds of analyses is at least they're repeatable. So if we have an algorithm we know does the same thing every time, even if it's wrong in an understandable way, and then we can improve it. Versus if I have every one of you go out with a clipboard and start counting, you're all going to do your own version of that count, and I don't have a way to, you know, easily normalize those numbers because somebody may be very careful and somebody else may be a bit sloppy in how they do that. So, you know, that's where the machine learning and the AI is really valuable, because over time we can improve it because we have understandable errors instead of random, you know, totally random. Everybody does their own thing. So maybe we'll follow up on that project. I don't know. Yeah.
Since you mentioned the machine learning, AI, is that you do it in-house, you develop, or you purchase the packages?
So that's an interesting question. The simple answer is, for the most part, we do not do this in-house. So we either partner with, as in the tree study, a university. So we're doing that with UCLA, and, you know, faculty and a doctoral student at UCLA are working on that project. In some cases, we purchase commercial solutions out of the box from vendors. The interesting thing there, and I'm not going to name anybody because I don't want to accuse anybody of not doing great work. We've had mixed results on the commercial products and how good they are, how good the results we get out of them are. So there's lots of vendors selling lots of machine learning algorithms that are, you know, hey, buy our tool set and we can tell you where all the trees are. We can tell you where all the impermeable surfaces are. The academic side of me, I don't like black boxes. I want to know what's in that black box, how your algorithm's working, and can we validate it, and, you know, and can, you know, is it peer reviewed, all that stuff. So the problem with those commercial things to a degree is, yeah, I can buy 3 different algorithms that claim to do the same thing and I get 3 different answers. So which vendor do I go with? You know, that's a hard one. And when you're writing a call for proposals, you know, I can say, I want somebody to give me a certain level of accuracy. That's the best I can do, but I don't know where the error is. Is it on species? Is it on health? Is it on certain species versus another for big trees? You know, so the way we try to do some of those is to do proof of concept works in partnership with the vendors before we do any contracts for big projects, to sort of find out, you know, together, can we optimize the algorithm? Can we optimize the workflow and make that better? And then, you know, if we can, you know, as I said earlier, I think that helps us to get a better product. It helps the vendors to be able to say, hey, we did it for LA County, they're the biggest county in the country, so you should trust us. Yeah. I mean, it's sort of, I mean, it's not that I'm trying to give people marketing material, but indirectly, you know, I think LARIAC is a perfect example as a program. LA County was the first county in the country to do a large regional imaging consortium. A lot of the tools that are in that product I showed on the screen to do measurements and analysis of the imagery that the vendor created were created in partnership with the county because we demanded them. And then they now sell those to all their other customers, of course. So I think in that sense, we can push the envelope and help vendors to see what's beneficial to us as a customer, and then they can help, co-develop them and then go off and use them elsewhere.
And this is so exciting because AIAA has you can say project, but also a theme we're working with. For example, next week we have the space architecture event, but those people are actually doing construction, but also this thing also related to the future city kind of things. And this data collected or technology developed. In the future, we have smart cars or flying cars. You all need all this kind of thing data available to make it work. But when you mentioned this, a couple of things come up with. First thing you mentioned academia. Actually, you can think about publishing on AIAA journal. I think that will be very interesting. The second question is, you mentioned LA County is the largest. I'm pretty sure it's what you ever is the leading in the nation for the city.
We try.
But is there any other cities doing similar things? You mentioned New York.
Yeah, I mean, in all these different realms, there's colleagues or counterparts of mine around the country that do this, and that's one of the things that you mentioned networking and the professional association.
Yeah.
Through the professional networks I have, I know the people that that run these programs in Chicago, New York, wherever. So we regularly are talking to each other and saying, oh, well, hey, have you guys done this kind of a project? What tools and imagery and resources did you bring to bear? So we do try to through both professional associations or just our professional networks, try to talk. And in fact, my counterpart in Cook County, Chicago, which is the second largest county in the country, they're about 3 million, we're about 10 million. So you can see the difference in 1 to 2. He just started over the last couple of months, and we've had 2 meetings now, a bi-monthly meeting of the 20 largest county GIOs in the country. So we get together now every other month and have a discussion around what we're doing with geospatial, how we're applying it, how we're running our programs, because we can all learn from each other and share those things. And I can, I'd add on to that too. Like I'm going to a conference, my students know this, next week up in, which is the big national GIS conference. We're doing a presentation on the CAMS addressing system, not explicitly, but on addressing and sort of enterprise level data systems in that realm, in conjunction with a counterpart from Georgia and a counterpart from one of the commercial firms that we work with. So we'll put together these collaborative projects and presentations or things like that as well.
Yeah, this is coming, you mentioned enterprise. Actually, this is very interesting from 2 perspectives. You mentioned consortium. So if people want to join your consortium, how would they do? They have to apply through you or?
Yeah, so the Lariat Consortium, and I'll just say up front, it is traditionally a government and academic consortium. And there have been discussions at various times about how or if we can include private organizations in that. At this point, there are none. I don't think that means there can't be. So, I think I would love to talk to folks who are interested in that.
Actually, that's the next question. Actually, I'm going to ask you because time is limited. How would you, can I say, how would you like AIAA or the local industry, aerospace industry, how would you be looking into what they can offer for you or what you're looking to? For example, we can try to make a connection. So what kind of area that you're looking like and are you currently working with Boeing or some company? Or
So
what are you looking into that we can assist?
So I think a couple of things. One, I'm going to turn to this room and say, as you did at the beginning, I think one of the things is opportunities that
You mentioned LiDAR.
Yeah,
I heard that.
yeah, but I think for the students, I think it's that they understand and see there are organizations that use and work around these geospatial collection and analysis and so on. The aerospace industry is probably doing more of the use of geospatial for things like navigation or how they or building systems that collect the data, right? So I think, those opportunities aren't necessarily always the first things that students in these kinds of programs know about or think about. So I'm happy we're able to do that. As far as potential partnerships, I haven't worked a lot with the aerospace industry directly, except where they're in the imagery collection.
That's JPL.
Right. The JPLs, the Vexels, the Eagle Views. So those are the firms that do they just take out of the box, airplanes and fly systems. They engineer the systems, the remote sensing systems. I've met with folks at aerospace a few times and, and we've talked about potential research projects. That was right before COVID, so that all kind of died with COVID. I'd love to re-engage with, the people who are looking for ways to use sensors to collect, data. And I know some of these sensor systems that we were talking about that are being developed in the private sector, they can detect certain chemical signatures, they can detect certain materials, they're getting into more tuned remote sensing systems. Again, when I think about enforcement as a government agency, I want to know if there's a chemical spill in the back of some, industrial facility. Wouldn't it be great if we could, fly over, we saw that with that, those gas leaks up in, I forget, up in Northern County, a few years ago, or the methane or whatever was coming out of the wells. If you can sense those kinds of things with systems that are either regularly flown airborne or orbital, because I think the big struggle we have as government is something like LARIAC. We plan those flights, they happen on a cycle, and we only get what happened on the day of the flight. It's these unexpected things, like an emergency or a chemical spill or whatever it might be. Or the insect infestations. If I have an orbital system or even an airborne system that's maybe more regularly flown, and we've talked to companies that fly blimps or things that could be up in the air for days at a time instead of just an hour. Those are the kinds of systems that are sort of monitoring systems that will be really valuable in government, not just for us, but I think most government agencies. And a lot of that is the stuff that are in the 3-letter agencies that we can't talk to, the secret stuff.
Yeah.
They're using that stuff in the CIA and the Geospatial Intelligence agencies, things like that. But 50 years ago, infrared imagery was a classified technology, until it became publicly available, and now we use it for vegetation analysis, and we can look at irrigation and water use and all these other things. I'd like to see, as those things are trickling into the public domain and non-classified, how can we start to leverage those things to do more effective governance?
I think, for example, the James Webb Space Telescope, they use the near IR. Yeah. So there's a lot of technology being used, developed as could be transmitted. Of course, that a lot of technology you are using potentially, I think the military is using, like in Ukraine.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, similar. So this kind of, but actually, you mentioned about the firefighting, those things. Do you have your own fleet to operate for those things?
Well, so for fire, there are some sensors that we have within the county fire, or shared between Orange County and LA County. They have some airborne systems that they fly real-time imagery on fires, and they transmit that data real-time back to the ground station so they can see the fire perimeters. So some of those things are happening. I think, again, making those workflows and those acquisitions easier, and maybe also, as we miniaturize, putting more of those things onto small drones, because a lot of these things we don't necessarily want to put aircraft up. Aircraft are expensive. You need a pilot, you need fuel, you need, big expensive equipment. If I could put the same sensor on a $1,000 or $10,000 drone instead of a $250,000 or $1 million aircraft, that's a huge win.
Yes.
Especially when we're talking about site level inspections or, mapping the fire front or a mudslide or something like that.
So how do you mentioned, for example, for satellite Spaceborne, you kind of work with JPL. Have you think about, for example, I know, but this is not top secret stuff that they talk about it. Northrop Grumman, for example, a few years ago, they worked on using military drone, but they make it more civilian.
Right.
They study the polar bear, and they also we have like talks, AIAA talks by people from Air Force or NASA. they use the same military drone, but they
Right.
make it NASA,
Right.
the Predator of some type. So maybe there's a possibility you can, just like the model, you work with JPL, maybe you can work with them, they operate their advanced. But that's bigger one.
Yeah.
The bigger drones. For example, we have a speaker that he was used to work with NASA and used, as I said, converted military drone, but for NASA's research. And they study the wildfire and they even how to put down the fire, those things. So maybe there is a way, maybe you can work with NASA or something.
Yeah. No, I think those are all, good possibilities, and again, I think, the tricky thing in government, and it's not unique to us, and, any of you who work in government knows, is we're not always viewed as the most innovative, and we don't move very fast. It takes us a long time to engage in a procurement to even buy something in the first place. So that's where doing these sorts of research projects, proof of concept, with universities and
Yeah.
partners, through other avenues. Because if we can show something works, if we can demonstrate something works, then it's easier to do the procurement to take a research project and make it into a programmatic workflow. And the thing is, and nobody's comfortable saying, oh, let's go out and spend a bunch of money on something we don't know is going to work. Because government's very cautious by nature, because we don't want to waste taxpayer dollars. Somebody's got to say, why'd you go spend all this money on this experiment when we've got these potholes that aren't being filled? So we have to, so where we can leverage those partnerships to demonstrate, the value or the opportunity first, it makes it a lot easier for us then to turn around and programmatically procure those services later. And that's how LARIAC and other things start.
Yeah.
it's
This very,
trying to experiment.
very good example, very good example. And the thing is, we also post a video online, and we also put out newsletter, so more of our folks, they can join us, they will be able to see, and we would love to build a connection. With more people. Any more questions here? I have tons, but I don't keep asking. Any question? One thing is you mentioned that some of the data, they are open access, but how do you prevent that guys?
The classic question.
Yeah, it's correct.
So I'm going to tell a short story, and we're getting close to the end of time. For a long time, the idea of open data, was kind of taboo. I mean, if you go back to the 80s or earlier, certain data was always open, but especially after 9/11, there's a real shutdown on sharing data. Government agencies be like, we can't share our water system network data on an open data site because a terrorist might poison the water system, or we can't post where our power plants are because they might blow up our power grid. Now, if I want to be really simplistic about it, I'd say if some bad actor really wants to take down our power grid, they don't need to download data from my website at the county to figure out where our power stations are. They can look at, they can get in their car, follow the power guy's truck driving around, and eventually they're going to see, oh, there's the power station. It's not hard. Somebody, if they want to find where City Hall is, they don't need to get a map from our website. They can just, they can drive downtown and find City Hall. So, on one level, it's just, I think that was an excuse, for lack of a better term, for people not wanting to share data. And the real reason, and I've been around this long enough to see the change. Historically, people didn't want to share data because their data wasn't very good. It was messy. It wasn't developed with the idea of sharing. So a lot of the codes or the details, they're like, well, I know in my head what this is, and it works for me in my office for my analysis. I run the water department at my city, and I'm good. But as soon as somebody outside comes and asks for it, it's like, well, wait, if I give it to you, you're going to ask me 100 questions about what the codes mean and why this error is here and how this works. And I don't have time for that. So I'd rather say I can't share the data. It's because the terrorists might use it to avoid the whole problem. But open data laws started coming into the norm in the 90s, 2000s, 2010s, over the last 20, 30 years, depending where you are, where the idea of sharing data has become more normalized and more common. We still face some people who don't want to share data. And I still believe, I mean, my wife, who's a social scientist, has a great saying. Asking somebody to show you their data is like asking them to show you their underwear. Because they don't want to expose all the hidden secrets. You know, it's like, you know, it's embarrassing if your data is not very good. You know, maybe you can do what you need, but as soon as somebody else has to figure it out, it's like, oh, now I gotta, now you're, you know, I look back, or I think I'm gonna look back. And the other thing people often were worried about is, well, it took me 5 years to build that data set up, and we spent all this time and effort. Why should I give it to you for free? You know, and my answer to that one is very simple. It's public money, government agency, taxpayers pay for it, so it's your data. Of course, we should share it. If our data isn't clean and understandable and the metadata is not good, we should fix it. So I'm always on, and I push this idea since I've come to the county, our default assumption should be all data is open unless there's a reason it can't be. If there's a confidentiality issue, you know, HIPAA data, medical data, privacy, you know, issues like that. But unless there's a really good reason not to make data public, it should be public. That's my perspective, and we've tried to make more and more of our data public, for you know, along that.
You mentioned about the tree, you know, in your house, it's no privacy issue. That's very good. Because the reason why I asked, because many years ago I have a friend and he realized that his house was imaged by Google.
Yeah.
So he somehow was able to reach to Google and tell them to remove his the scape, you know, of his house. So he showed me that Google indeed took it out.
Yeah.
So if you go to the Google map, you cannot see the sun. Interesting. Yeah, but anyway, that's kind of funny. The imaging is everything. 2 days ago, we saw the DART, NASA DART hit the asteroid. And then you can see it while the hitting, that shows everything.
Oh, yeah.
I'm so excited. So this is one thing. If you show the street view, you see there are so many maps, you know, 3D maps on Android or Apple phones, iOS phones, and so. But how do you differentiate? I guess what you're saying is that you're kind of doing study certain kind of things. So, for example, in the future, if there is like a smart cars, smart cities, would those data come from companies like Google or actually come from cities?
It'll be a mix. So that CAMS data I alluded to at the beginning with the addresses, and that also includes street center lines.
The LiDAR is very important, you know,
Yeah.
keep the cars and distant to the building.
Right. So having that kind of data set, a lot of that comes from government agencies. And I think, again, it's because the companies don't want the liability, right? If my self-driving car crashes because my data set privately acquired wasn't good, now my company's liable. If I took the official data from the county, well, now maybe the county's liable. So you can, yeah, I don't want the liability either, but you know, that's a way, I think it's a way to protect in some sense, but more importantly, it's the idea that the county's data in this case of, you know, addresses and streets is the official data. Legally, it already is. We are responsible to assign addresses. So if your self-driving car has to know how to get to 123 Main Street, we better know where 123 Main Street is and what the roads are to get me there. And if something changes, you know, we're the entity responsible to know it changed and communicate that change. So, and those things, as I said, they roll up to, you know, from counties to states to federal, you know, for a whole bunch of different kinds of data. So it's, you know, in this country, it is the role of government to be the source of certain kinds of information that's trusted. So, you know, something like that, sure, that is definitely going to feed the self-driving cars and, you know, a lot of the other things.
You mentioned it's like the scanning, you know, detection, acquisition of image. Because that's actually, how often do you update those data?
So the aerial imagery we do.
Satellite, I know it takes a.
Right. Well, yeah, satellites we don't control, right? Those are public satellites or private satellites like Maxar and things. We haven't done a lot with satellite data. We're starting to look at that as a possibility for frequent. Most of ours is airborne from aircraft. So we schedule those at most twice a year, more often once a year. We're sort of playing with that. In our next LARIAC cycle, I don't know what we're going to land on. I think I'm pushing for twice a year to continue. So we get sort of a spring and summer, or, winter, summer, sort of early in the year and late summer.
Some of our students or professor, they have the student cube set. So maybe kind of collaboration that could set up some kind of project.
Yeah.
And we also do some kind of demo. We are working with some company and we're trying to do the drone demo. We can kind of put up some kind of project, small project, as you said, showcase of your software or database using. That could be a good project for education type of things.
Well, we're probably getting to the point we should wrap up.
I'm sorry, because it's so exciting.
I'll hang on a second, but I know some people have drives ahead of them, so.
Okay, all right. So let's thank Dr. Steinberg. This appreciation certificate.
Oh, well,
Representing
thank you so
our
much.
AIAA Center and Data Center. Thank you everyone for joining
So
us.
I can hang out and talk for a few minutes if you guys want to throw, that's fine. Remember, next week, Monday, with Dr. Wexler, instead of Wednesday, and I will be back on Wednesday with Dr. Wexler the following week. It's all on your syllabus, as everything is.